Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. The trench warfare continues. Mainstream media's coverage of President-elect Donald Trump has changed little since the campaign ended. Is the media setting Trump up for failure? And can he effectively fight back? To CrossTalk media coverage of Donald Trump, I'm joined by my guest, David Paul Kuhn in New York. He is an analyst and author of the political novel, What Makes It Worthy? Also in New York, we have Mark Crispin Miller. He is a professor of media, culture, and communication at New York University, as well as author of Fooled Again, The Real Case for Electoral Reform. And in Los Angeles, we cross to H.A. Goodman. He is a columnist and journalist published at the Huffington Post, Salon, The Hill, and other publications. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always encourage it. H.A., you got up the earliest today, so I'm going to reward you with the first question here. I think what we've entered into a media atmosphere that is unique. We all know, and we don't have to repeat it, that the media, corporate media, basically holds Donald Trump in contempt as a candidate and now as president-elect. But what's different here, and what's interesting here also, is that he is in contempt of them, and that makes them even more angry that he has contempt for them. And this is an interesting scenario. Go ahead. How do you feel about that?
Well, to understand the media and Donald Trump, you first have to understand how the media tried to undermine Bernie Sanders and how the media addressed the issue of race and Hillary Clinton. So, for example, Hillary Clinton called black youth super predators. She took prison lobbyist money in 2015 after Bill Clinton apologized for the epidemic of mass incarceration. In 2008, she utilized a photo of Barack Obama in African attire that David Plouffe said was the most offensive, shameful fear-mongering of either party in the election. She used a racist 3 a.m. ad that, according to Harvard's Orlando Patterson, was a racist political advertisement against Barack Obama in 2008. The media did not discuss this at all. It was always, well, Trump made offensive statements. He's a racist, the embodiment of racism. They never talked about, in terms of the New York Times and the Washington Post, they never talked about Hillary Clinton's use of racism against Barack Obama, or the fact she took prison lobbyist money, or the fact that she called black youth super predators. They never talked about that in terms of her image pertaining to race. When you talk about Bernie Sanders, the DNC WikiLeaks emails, Debbie Wasserman Schultz was forced to resign. 5 other DNC officials were forced to resign. Donna Brazile was forced to resign from CNN for handing questions to Hillary Clinton. The media did not discuss this. In fact, the corruption that was exposed by WikiLeaks, that was all a Russian plot. So the Washington Post and the New York Times, they were pumping, they were saying that Hillary was going to win. The polls were having her win. WikiLeaks was part of a Russian conspiracy along with Donald Trump. The issue there is, you talk about the DNC WikiLeaks emails. Bernie Sanders' faith was used against him. They tried to say, well, you know what, let's paint him as an atheist instead of a Jewish person because an atheist is easier to beat. If Donald Trump had done that, my goodness, it would have been national news.
All right,
the fact that Hillary Clinton's campaign did that.
We do know, if I'm going to David, we do know that they don't like Donald Trump, but it's primarily because it's different values. They don't see themselves in him at all. He's an alien force for them. And I think they begrudge him is that so many Americans actually see themselves in him, and we can talk about not liking Hillary Clinton, but we really do have, in a different way, because I hate the cultural wars, but we have a different cultural war when it comes to Trump and the media. Go ahead, David.
I agree entirely on that point, which is that Donald Trump's a highly unconventional candidate, and now he's a highly unconventional presidential-elect. And the media doesn't know how to sort of manage proper expectations, proper coverage when it comes to Donald Trump. I would argue, though, that the bias in the media is complicated because as much as they hold Trump in contempt, it's in many respects Trump is a reflection of all their worst vices as well.
Yeah, sure.
And what I mean by that is for all the criticism the media gives to Trump on, say, political theater or political entertainment, I mean, he's a mirror onto they've been treating politics as theater for decades.
Yeah.
On top of that, I mean, even recently, there's been this silly little criticism of Trump and his use of Twitter. Now, I'm not going to argue that using Twitter is presidential, but it's really, really rich to have a bunch of political journalists who are entirely addicted to Twitter.
Yeah.
And 100%, nearly 100% of political journalists use Twitter. So it's extremely rich to have them critical of the president-elect for following them to a medium that they trailblaze. So I think that across the board, in many respects, Donald Trump is also a reflection of many of the worst characteristics that have come to define our political media in the United States in recent decades.
You know, it's interesting. That's very interesting analysis, you know, Mark, because, you know, politics has been turned into theater, and then Donald Trump just happened to be the best actor, okay, and they helped make it that way. Mark, you know, one of the interesting things is we heard about Twitter, and I think that's very interesting, is because another reason why the mainstream media doesn't like Donald Trump is because he's bypassing them now. He's going directly to them on YouTube. He's using Twitter. He has no use for the media at all because, well, if I were him, I would feel the same way. What do I need them for? They don't like me. They misreport me. They put me in a bad light. Forget them. I'm going to go straight to the citizen. And you know what? I think this is what he's going to do for the next 4 years. What do you think, Mark?
Well, you know, listening to this conversation, and I agree with pretty much everything my fellow panelists have said, I am struck by the fact that there was a kind of antecedent to all this. This is not entirely new because it's reminiscent of the relationship between the American media and Richard Nixon. I mean, there too, you had a very combative relationship. You had the press always ready to attack him. There was the same sense of a kind of cultural clash, you know, between him and his constituents on the one hand and the East Coast liberal elite on the other. And he too also sought to talk around the media directly to the American people. In fact, Roger Ailes of Fox News got his start producing these propaganda spectacles for Nixon in the arena, he called them, and he would have Nixon engage directly with sort of a hand-picked American audience. But I think you know, this is a very complicated issue, as David says. One of the points I'd like to make is that the press, for all its animus against Trump, and there's no question it has that animus, has also been consistently ignoring legitimate stories about Trump, you know, dirt on Trump that they ought to have been digging into and never did. And it's also because that would be too close to home. For example, Donald Trump has a long history of mob connections. Donald Trump was closely involved with all the corrupt politicians around Ed Koch. A lot of them went to prison. Donald Trump was a predatory landlord. Donald Trump's real estate practices have been very revealing. He built Trump Tower with a tax abatement for low-income housing. None of this has been reported by the media, none of it. You know those rectangular objects that are filled with paper? You find them in libraries? Books, that's right. There are a lot of books about him and Hillary, you know, books that reporters, you know, if reporters could put down their cell phones for a minute and maybe pick up one of these weird rectangular objects, they might actually learn something. There's a book called The Making of Donald Trump by David K. Johnston. You'd think the press would have committed this book to memory by now, but they don't know anything about it. Now, let me make one last point.
Okay, go ahead.
It seems to me that let me just, please, Peter, let me just say.
Sure, go ahead.
Maybe the most important story about Donald Trump at the moment is the question as to whether he and Pence were actually legitimately elected. I mean, you know, H.A. rightly mentioned a moment ago that Hillary was exalted by the press to the disfavor of Bernie Sanders, and that includes stealing a number of primary elections from him, demonstrably stealing from them. And the evidence is out there. The press never talked about it. The press never talked about that, and now they're refusing to talk about the possibility of election fraud and vote suppression having been responsible for his victory, which is very strange.
I think that's been tried out, and I don't think it's going to really go anywhere because the evidence doesn't lead us that way. But anyway, H.A., one of the things I think is interesting, and Mark,
we don't know that yet.
Well, okay, but H.A., one of the things that's really interesting to me is that I get the impression that the media is actually angry with the electorate, that they voted the wrong way, and they're going to try to convince them that they were wrong for the next 4 years. Because I think, again, it goes down to this clash of values. Go ahead, in Los Angeles.
Well, the media, the Washington Post and the New York Times, essentially served as public relations firms for Hillary Clinton, the Clinton campaign, the Democratic establishment. for the media to actually say, well, we were wrong, Arizona was never a swing state, Hillary Clinton, she was up in all these polls. For example, 538 said 80% chance that Hillary would win. Donald Trump would never become nominee, not only president, nominee, they said. So they were wrong on everything. For them to actually admit they were wrong would be to basically undermine the reason they exist in many ways. In terms of why they can't admit they're wrong, the Democratic establishment...
They actually have admitted they were wrong.
Yeah, I would say
they've
that
admitted they're wrong.
No, let me go to David.
We have to separate.
Go ahead, David. Go ahead. Go.
Again, I don't want. I'm not going to now defend the media's coverage of
it's
this
okay.
election,
It's okay.
I'll say this.
It's okay.
We have to separate, but it is important. We have to separate mistakes from bias.
Okay.
I would say that it's the mistake on polling has a lot to do, transcends Donald Trump. It has to do with taking polling too literally, has to do with treating fluctuations in polls as actual fluctuations in the horse race, an addiction to polling, and to not really internalize into margins of error. So listen, anyone who looked at the data was misdirected. We thought Hillary Clinton would win the presidency. That said, I would say that the introspection on the part of the media in its entire coverage of this campaign has been paper thin.
Yeah, I agree.
And there really should be, to use a term from the South, there really needs to be a come to Jesus moment for the American media on their miscoverage of this campaign. I would say on the subject of predicting outcomes, I would hope that the lesson from 2016 is perhaps dial down the prediction part of journalism. Your job is to report, not predict.
Yeah, but the problem is that they thought it was a shoo-in, and so I think they were very lazy about it. Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on bias in the media. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing Trump's relationship with the media. Okay, I'm going to go back to Los Angeles. AJ, one of the interesting things to come about since the election is that we have this new meme out there, fake news. And it's a very complicated, and we can discuss it at great length, but it came about in a way, in my mind, is to justify for the failures of the media in the election, is that they're trying to redeem themselves, saying, these people are fake, but we're real news here. And please forget that we really screwed up the 2016 election cycle, and but we're going to focus our attention on these fake people here. Now, I have argued on this program that a great deal of the mainstream is fake for a number of reasons, and we could start with Iraq in 2003, and I can give you about a dozen cases all the way up to the present. I'm not going to waste time on it right now. But, this meme to come out, fake news, is kind of a self-justification for what they did or didn't do during the election. Go ahead.
Well, the fake news propaganda is basically linked to the fact that, for example, Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton meet on a plane in a tarmac in Phoenix. The official story is that they spoke about golf, Brexit, and grandchildren. The media totally accepted that. Yep. New York Times, Washington Post totally accepted that, never questioned. There was also, during the FBI interview, Hillary Clinton talked about a laptop. One of Bill Clinton's aides actually shipped her laptops with 4 years of her emails in the mail. UPS, FedEx, we don't know. The media actually said that that was legitimate, real news. When you talk about the fake news issue, it's just one of the many reasons that Hillary Clinton lost, according to the mainstream media. So it's really an attempt to marginalize voices of dissent or different voices out there. That's all it is. You talk about, when you look at the corruption and the collusion between WikiLeaks exposed, dinner at John Podesta's house with a whole bunch of journalists from the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNBC, MSNBC. You have Chuck Todd hosting a dinner for John Podesta and Jennifer Palmieri. So there's immense collusion between the media and the Democratic establishment And you can't really separate that from the media's coverage of Donald Trump. It's always going to be Trump as an ogre, he's racist, and never focusing on Hillary Clinton's racism, never focusing on the collusion, never focusing on the fact that they were so dreadfully wrong on all their predictions. And in many ways, they're still operating like it's November 7th.
Exactly.
After the election.
You know, David, go ahead, Mark, jump in. That's the point of the program. Please do.
Can I jump in?
No, let me go to Mark first. Let me go to Mark first. Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Apologies.
Go ahead, Mark.
Apologies.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to jump first, and then you can jump, David. Fake news is sort of the latest version of conspiracy theory, right? You had conspiracy theory used repeatedly by the media to discredit any number of inconvenient stories. Now, fake news is kind of like conspiracy theory 2.0. Well, I want to say that, and don't take this the wrong way, please, but in a way, the show itself, this show itself, is actually repeating a very common meme of the corporate press, which is that, they were wrong about what was going to happen on Election Day. Trump was actually elected by a disrespected, invisible majority of voters, etc. I'm perfectly ready to believe that, but there is considerable evidence of rampant vote suppression and computerized election fraud having been used to affect that victory. This kind of discussion, Peter, has been taboo for 15 years.
I know.
I can tell you this as a seasoned and exhausted election integrity activist. So all I'm saying is, we cannot with confidence assert that all that pre-election data was incorrect. We cannot with confidence assert that all the exit polls were wrong and that only the official count, which is done on computerized voting machines run by private companies, is correct.
But
That's
I think you would,
ridiculous.
Mark, I think you would agree with me, Mark, though. I mean, I think it's the electoral process, okay, and the mechanism of it here. But for the losing side to go out and say it was outsiders and Russia did this and it's because of WikiLeaks and all that, I find that really disingenuous.
Peter,
I find it's the electoral. I'm the one that said it. I'm the one that said it. Yeah, I'm the one that said it. Okay.
I know, but the Democrats are not contesting the election. The Democrats are claiming that Russia may have done it. But other than claiming that Russia may have hacked the vote, they are staying very far away from any kind of a challenge to this election, just as they did in 2000. They have Jill Stein doing it for them. Just as they did in 2000. No,
Jill Stein's doing it. Okay, no,
they don't have Jill Stein doing it for them.
Let David jump in here. Go ahead, David. Go ahead, David.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we don't get too hyperbolic.
Okay.
There is no doubt that there's an effort at voter suppression, right? And there's no doubt that the Republican Party makes a prolonged effort to limit to make it more difficult for people to vote through IDs and such. And of course, that has a disparate impact on Democratic constituencies. But people have looked at this election very closely, including the Clinton campaign. And ultimately, and people who very much want to make the argument, and the data does not show that that voter suppression, to an extent that exists, actually changed the outcome of the presidential race so far. Two, the exit polls were wrong, but they were not totally wrong. In other words, I would say they don't conflict. They don't fine. Exit polls, well, let me tell you. Let me answer that. When you look at the demographic breakouts of the exit polls, they actually conflict from the pre-election polling. The demographic breakouts from the exit polls, what surprised a lot of people was that, for example, the college-educated white vote was much tighter than the pre-election polls, many, not all, indicated. And I would also say that when we talk about the bias in the media, and especially towards the Clinton campaign, it's important to say there was definitely, in my opinion, a bias towards the Clinton campaign, a left-leaning bias, an antagonistic relationship with Donald Trump in the general election. But I think we've gone a little far in saying that they were not willing to cover, say, Hillary Clinton on certain controversial topics. They did discuss that visit on the airplane, that unseemly visit, and they did. For example, in the 2008 campaign, they went a bridge too far, I would argue, in the primary against Barack Obama in calling Bill Clinton racist for certain, I think, neutral comments on that this guy would have been getting us coffee. I think that was, for example, a criticism of Barack Obama's slim resume and not anything to do with his race. So, and I would also say that when we talk about criticism on race, we have to be careful on moral equivalence. Donald Trump did prevaricate on issues of like whether to denounce the KKK on CNN, the KKK leader David Duke. And I would also say that it's important that we separate defending Donald Trump from defending his voters. In other words, I think there is an effort to marginalize Donald Trump's voters and therefore marginalize his victory.
I agree.
And I think that that's slightly different. Anyway,
H.A., I want to go back to this theme about Trump going directly to the citizenry. Is this going to change the way the mainstream reports? Because I mean, they're going to be sidelined. They don't want to do that. Okay. I mean, their ratings are already pretty poor. Okay, and their revenue is going to be hit here. I mean, it's really incumbent upon them to make some kind of a rapprochement with Trump if they want to remain relevant. Because I mean, he'll just get his own YouTube channel and he'll just do it himself. And you know what? He might just do it. Real, I mean, and he'll watch your YouTube channel like I do. Go ahead, H.A. in L.A.
Thank you, Peter. Well, what Trump does is he trolls the media.
Yep.
And the media, all the journalists are on Twitter. He writes a tweet, sends it out, and Paul Krugman's head explodes in the New York Times. And then all the issues, all the big issues that are not spoken about by the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Daily Beast, these issues like the Dakota Access Pipeline, the Standing Rock Sioux, the fact that water protectors at Standing Rock were being shot at with water cannons, point-blank range with rubber bullets. 2 women were injured for life. 1 woman had her eye shot out, and another woman had her arm blown off. The New York Times, the Washington Post didn't talk about it because President Obama is president. If Trump were president, the water cannons, the hoses, the attack dogs that the Dakota Sioux, the Standing Rock Sioux and the water protectors endured, this slate in the Daily Beast would say it's white nationalists, it's horrible sexism, it's all this racism. But because a Democrat's in office, they don't talk about it. That's the issue. And also, one other thing is this: when you talk about Bernie Sanders, for example, I'll just bring back Bernie. He wanted to break up too big to fail banks. He wanted to reinstate Glass-Steagall. He wanted to go ahead, implement a single payer. He wanted to stop never-ending perpetual counterinsurgency wars where we send Americans to fight, where half to 2/3 of all the Americans killed and wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan were the victims of IED blasts. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Daily Beast, all these public relations firms for the establishment, they don't want to talk about those issues. They'd much rather say, "Oh, did you see what Trump tweeted?" And as Trump tweets, we don't talk about his business dealings abroad. We don't talk about all the issues that the panelists just now discussed.
All right. Let me go to Mark here.
Donald Trump.
Let me go to Mark here in New York. I mean, how do you think this relationship is going to go forward in the next 4 years? Because as I keep stressing here, Trump can go straight to the citizens himself. He doesn't need the filter. And if I were him, I wouldn't want that filter either. I watched that campaign very carefully, and I would, if I were Donald Trump, I would just say, why don't we just get, move an internet cafe into the White House, because that's how we're going to run this operation with the public. Go ahead.
Right. Well, I want to start by agreeing as strongly as I can with what H.A. just said. The Democrats and the Republicans in this country have run what I call a hog and phony show for years. The corporate Democrats are constantly pointing to their right. To the freaks on their right and warning, if you don't vote for us, you're going to get that. And then what ends up happening is the corporate Democrats end up screwing the American people in countless ways. And that's, let's face it, Hillary Clinton wouldn't have had a prayer of winning if she weren't paired with, or she weren't matched up against Donald Trump, whose candidacy, as we know from the WikiLeaks emails, her team was pushing the media as hard as possible to promote. So, that's what happened there. But I want to resist the implication, Peter, that I'm getting from your point about going around the media, that Donald Trump is some kind of Huey Long, some kind of authentically populist character who will speak directly to the American people. Because I'll tell you something. I mean, I was as happy as anybody could be that we seem to have dodged a bullet on war with
really
Russia.
have to end. We've run out of time here. Many thanks to my guests in New York and in Los Angeles. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules. I love you.